14. And some big news this week. Today, just dropping, Metaplanet's entering the U.S. markets. Officially taking a majority stake in Super League, an equity out there, SLE, which we were talking in the pre-show. It has been bumping already in pre-market on the news. I think it was trading at $3 at close yesterday. It's up 56%. I'll have to throw that chart up here on screen. But Yves, Chase, welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Good stuff. So yeah, here's the we led with the Metaplanet news. They're coming in. They've earmarked 2,100 Bitcoin to take a majority stake in this company, Super League Enterprises, that has is an operating company in the online gaming marketing space. I don't know a lot. I haven't dug into the history of that company, but this is a first step towards Metaplanet kind of launching their U.S. strategy. On the back of a lot of recent news from Metaplanet. They've been able to stack some more Bitcoin. They had another acquisition in Japanese markets earlier this year, Cboe Securities, which is Metaplanet Securities, and the combined entity here is going to be called Superplanet here in the U.S. So, it looks like they're gearing up to launch a pref. They've got the option to, basically purchase a couple $100 million more in this equity. And we're going to bring Quentin in here. I think he's in the lobby as well. But I'd like to get your guys' take on what you think about the news with Metaplanet. Coming in here from the jump. Yves, I'll pass it over to you first.
Well, first of all, super excited to see that because we've speculated on the one chair with Quentin about exactly having this dual strategy for Metaplanet and having and setting up really shop in the US and potentially start seeing exactly even preferreds in the US that are coming from Metaplanet, right? And that's it based on the slides that we've seen and what they're mentioning is exactly that. Not only that, but also when they acquired Metaplanet's, Cboe that became Metaplanet Securities, they mentioned at some point that they could actually see some preferreds or instruments from the US and that they could actually bring them to Japan as well. And this is, again, part of the whole mission. And now you're really starting to see all the puzzles, all the pieces of puzzle of the Metaplanet, like grand vision coming to fruition, and it's amazing to see that exactly. They've been super quiet throughout most of the year, but there's pieces of news here and there that make me very excited about the company and the future of the company, because you can see that there is a strategy, there is a roadmap. They can't reveal everything all the time. Like we see strategy and Strive coming with news week over week, and it's great. But Metaplanet are more quiet, but they've been building, I think, a very solid foundation. And obviously there's probably still a lot to do. And we see also the acquisition right now. Obviously, this is something that there still needs some approvals. I think we can also dive into some of the slides later. But it's not fully complete. But regardless, I think some amazing news coming from Metaplanet for sure. So very, very excited.
Yeah, what are your initial thoughts on the news, Chase? This is something that's kind of been telegraphed for a while, and now we kind of have a first step. That the deal is kind of expected to close here in Q4 of 2026. But is this kind of the framework you thought, and what are we expecting from I guess Superplanet moving forward?
Well, it always makes sense to try to tap American capital markets. So it seemed like it would only be a matter of time before they found a way to do so, especially with the acquisition of the new securities platform. Clearly, they have an appetite for launching new instruments. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done that. I think it's interesting that they went with a majority stake acquisition in a company as opposed to whether it's a SPAC or OTC or a preferred launch. So I do think that that's interesting. I'd never heard of Super League before this. Sorry to any gamers out there. I don't know how popular they are. I'm not a fellow gamer. Sorry. But it is very interesting that they're going to have this dual strategy. I saw Brian Brookshire, who's somebody I respect in the Bitcoin Treasury analyst space kind of teased that, companies can't come into Japan, but Japan can come into the US, and that, Metaplanet is now taking advantage of that. And it's worth noting that, 2000, what was it? 2,100 Bitcoin, right? Is that the total amount that they pledged?
Yes. Yeah, you got that right.
Right. So that's roughly $135 million worth of capital. And if you look at the market cap of Super League today, it's a total of 7.3 million. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens to the market cap and stock price of Super League Enterprise SLE in the coming days and weeks, as its shareholder base has to shuffle and adjust for this new strategy. So I'll be keeping an eye out for that.
Yeah, yeah, and this is the first time we saw a big rip on a Bitcoin spinoff. These charts were really common, when Bitcoin treasury companies launched last year. Seeing a big wick up, I was curious to see, how the stock would react, and so far, it looks like there's a lot of interest. I'm sure the volume today, So there's there's $41 million of volume. It looks like on the stock. Where the average volume is 742,000 shares. So a big spike in price, and I think there is a lot of appetite. Yes, there were ways to get Bitcoin exposure in U.S. markets, Metaplanet exposure in U.S. markets. But now that there's a U.S. domiciled equity, and it's clear that 2,100 Bitcoin are coming in from the jump. They've also got an option again to invest a couple $100 million more into the prefs in the coming quarters. I think the investor appetite is there, and we'll see how high the ceiling is. Famously in the last run up, Metaplanet had just a huge. I think their MNAV grew to 8 or 10x, their Bitcoin holdings. So there was a lot of exuberance and excitement about the equity, and we'll see how this shakes out. And I mean, if this is the catalyst to launching a pref here in the U.S. and they can turn that around quickly and come to market, I think the sky's the limit here, especially if Bitcoin's price cooperates. Quentin, I'll throw it over to you. What are your initial thoughts on the news here?
Yeah, I was excited to hear it too, but as you guys all mentioned, it's been telegraphed, right? It's been a rumor for a while that they would be trying to tap the U.S. capital market. So it's great to see that they were able to execute on that. And I think in the Bitcoin treasury space, it's been the big question, right? Which company will be next to issue preferred after Strategy and Strive, and now it looks like Metaplanet is on a nice track to be able to do that. Then I wonder how the market will react to that one, because in the US we already have Strategy, we have SATA from Strive. So how popular will this pref be from Metaplanet in the US remains to be seen. And I think still the big USP for Metaplanet remains Japan, and whenever they are able to tap that market with the low yield environment, and once they can issue Japanese prefs, that would be when I get really interested in Metaplanet.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I think, it becomes really interesting. Tim Kotzman's here, everybody's, favorite, hardest working Bitcoin podcaster in the space. How's it going, Tim? And what do you make of the Metaplanet news? We've been going around the horn here, and we're pretty bullish on Metaplanet coming to the U.S. market.
Yeah, I mean, was I smash buying Superplanet this morning? Yes, right? I call it grain of salt. He's like, no, I'm not, right? The SpaceX IPO, it goes up, it goes back down. Maybe all that's true, and maybe I'm calling out grain of salt unnecessarily here. But what if this is the beginning of the next Bitcoin bull market, right? Maybe you can wait a day, a week, a month or two, but a couple years from now, when everybody's walking around saying, I made so much money on SLE, be like, but I didn't get in at $6 like Tim did, right? So okay, I'm done shilling Superplanet, but
all right. Tim's solely the reason we're up 50% here, right, today.
I'm just smashing. No. I think it does underscore that the U.S. capital markets, the New York Stock Exchange, the Nasdaq, these are the largest, the most liquid capital markets in the world. And in all of my conversations with UK companies and other international companies, I mean, there's a reason why they want that ticker, whether it's starting on the OTC markets or whether it's something like this. I mean, you just cannot deny the U.S. capital markets. And so, at the sake of saying something obvious, I think that's a good starting point.
Yep.
What do you think of the ticker it's going to be, Tim? It looks like it's going to be SUPA.
Or SUPA. It's SUPA.
SUPA. Okay, SUPA.
Yeah, I haven't talked to Dylan or Simon or anyone, so SUPA is ready.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, the branding's really cool. Superplanet. I haven't dug into it. Maybe I can dig into this live on the call here. Kind of the quarterly earnings. I don't know if any of you guys have looked at SLE, the legacy gaming business, into any of their earnings, but I'll take a look at that here live on the call and continue to throw it around here. But just while we're taking a look at this, the proposed transaction, again, just to highlight for anyone who just jumped on, with Metaplanet entering U.S. markets, they're bringing in 2,100 Bitcoin, and Super League Enterprise is becoming Superplanet. They're keeping on, interestingly, the same CEO who's operating the company now. So I thought that was an interesting take, and I'm interested to dig into the background of their current CEO and kind of the story of how they targeted this company, and what the operating business can provide as a additive to the Bitcoin business. But they were very clear in the documentation that obviously the Bitcoin treasury strategy is going to be the main indicator of how this equity trades and how this company grows moving forward. And yeah, I mean it is a big deal. 2,100 Bitcoin. That's a lot smaller in scale on a pref size. Even, I think Strive had probably 7,000 Bitcoin when they launched SATA. So you've got to think Metaplanet's going to be contributing more Bitcoin to this deal before they launch preferred equity. The listing staying the same, like Chase said. They didn't go the SPAC route. They didn't go the reverse merger route, but they, directly, purchased 95% of the common equity there, probably saving them a little bit on the legal side by going that route. They're bringing in $2.5 million of cash straight away, and this Super League, Superplanet, as it's going to be named, is basically a consolidated listed subsidiary of Metaplanet. So, Metaplanet's pledging their 2,100 Bitcoin, which is about, let's see, doing quick math here, about 5% of their total treasury. So yeah, they released some really good graphics here on screen where you can take a peek at the percentage of Bitcoin that they're basically allocating into this business. But they're taking control of the board as well, notably, obviously, with their 95% stake now. They're going to keep 4 of the legacy board members intact, and they're naming 5 of their own board members, so they'll have control there, and of course the majority of the voting power. So this is a clean, essentially a takeover. I'm sure that's been in the works for a while. And any takeaways? Maybe I'll stop sharing my screen, but if any, Yves, I know you were taking a look at the presentation, had a look at the slides that the team put out, and any takeaways from what the company released and the strategic rationale behind this thing?
Maybe I'll start with taking a step back, because just think about it, right? We're looking at a hotel company that was basically dying, or a zombie company. They grew their balance sheet thanks to Bitcoin. They managed to get over 40,000 Bitcoin. And now they have this optionality to actually start acquiring businesses to amplify their strategy in different jurisdictions. They managed to take over a company, and all of that just by utilizing 2,100 Bitcoin. So I believe that's around 4 or 5% of their holding, more or less. and they were able to acquire this company thanks to that. So just maybe take a step back and think about that, because we've been hearing a lot of the naysayers and the bears, how these companies are the worst capital allocators because they've been buying Bitcoin at the top. They're doing financial engineering and I don't know what, but this just shows that the strategy is actually working. Like they're expanding their operations, and they're doing that in such a great way, I think, because obviously it's not a hostile takeover or anything like this. They're just using their Bitcoin, and they're able to acquire this new company through this means. And just again taking it as a perspective moment, and to realize that, right? I think it just shows that exactly this Bitcoin treasury strategy is overall working. And again, we're in the depths of a bear market. We're not even in a bull market. So that's pretty impressive in my opinion. And in regards to the slides, I think we've said quite a bit already in terms of what Metaplanet has shown. I think probably one of the key aspects will be interesting is how the whole thing operates, right? I think maybe I can briefly share my screen as well, because there's a slide that I thought quite interesting, is how it's going to operate as well between the basically the group and obviously the US company now, Superplanet. So exactly, and that's going to be really fascinating to see exactly how all of this really intertwines and really works together. So here we basically see how how you have the group. At the group level, you have all the Bitcoin holdings and all of that, and then you would have that some of the dividends that can be applied to the US preferreds and so on, and then that obviously brings back capital to the whole group. And that's probably a very simple vision, but then we need to also think about, again, going back to Metaplanet securities, how all of that will operate. And so I think this is just the beginning of something much bigger. But I thought this slide was quite intriguing in that sense. And I'd be curious to hear Chase, Quentin, Tim, or yourself, Tyler, thoughts on this one.
Well, I'll jump in for a sec. So one thing that I found interesting about this is the speed at which they're able to move when they acquire a majority stake in an existing company, as opposed to kind of the stall out period that we saw with 21, and all of the changes that happened during that stall out period, all of the frustrations that arrived from the investor base, all of the "you're not doing anything," accusations, and I'm sure that didn't. It probably contributed to some of the pressures that ultimately led to Jack Mallers leaving that group. And here you just have, a majority stake takeover of an existing publicly listed entity. It feels like a much faster, much more straightforward path into the US markets. And I wonder if this will be maybe a lesson for other companies that are looking to do something similar, that maybe you don't want to go the SPAC reverse merger route. Yeah, maybe that's cleaner because you can kind of start from scratch, but maybe cleaner with a long runway is worse than fast and just rip the Band-Aid. And then the other thing that this kind of made me think about today is I'd watched the Natalie Brunell stakeholder questionnaire with Fong Li and Michael Saylor of Strategy. And in that, Saylor reiterated that they have no interest in an M&A strategy. But this really shows you, like, look what Metaplanet can do with just 2,100 Bitcoin, right? Imagine if in the future Strategy actually were willing to use some of the Bitcoin on its balance sheet to start acquiring operating entities or other businesses that produce cash flow. I know it's not their intention. Digital credit is a big enough space on its own, but that capital is there. There will be more capital in the future in Bitcoin terms, and especially in fiat US dollar terms. And there will be a lot of profitable operating companies that may eventually become synergistic to the strategy.
Yeah, I think that's a key. Great point, Chase. Yeah, it's like strategy is eventually going to do this type of thing, but the opportunities there for these smaller companies, these companies like Metaplanet that are operating outside the U.S. Jurisdiction as well. Yeah, I did just do a quick little high level dig into the earnings for the legacy operating business, and it looks like they've done $6 million in revenue. So it is pretty tiny. $6 million in revenue first half of this year. So that projects out to $12 million in revenue, but something that I think is going to be, the profit's probably going to be able to be swept into Bitcoin, and I am curious what they think about the operating business and the plans for it moving forward. But yeah, there's no outstanding debt with the company, so I'm sure that was a key piece of it. I also one thing from the press release that I saw was that they're acquiring warrants over the next 10 years at prices up to $33 a share. Metaplanet is in the company. Does anyone have a takeaway on why that might be the case, considering they're already purchasing 96% of the company from the jump? What's the impact of them purchasing, more warrants at different strike prices moving forward when they already own a super majority of the company? Anyone have insight or why that might have been structured that way? Great, me neither. There's something to dig into and ask.
Yeah, I was gonna say we need Dylan
good
for this
question for
one,
Dylan
honestly.
and Simon. We do. We'll see if we can get Dylan on the show for a guest spot here in the near future to give us the rundown. But yeah, I mean, anything else from as a takeaway that was part of this? We've just looking at the comments here. Sandeep Star, our number one commenter and number one fan, was asking if he thinks there's any effect on the listing of MPJPY, which yeah, I mean, I do wonder if Metaplanet is going to pursue an uplisting to Nasdaq for their Metaplanet ticker, or if they just view Superplanet as now the U.S. proxy, for the company. Do you guys have any speculation on that front?
I mean, looking at the slides again, it feels like LSE would be the publicly traded company for Metaplanet, right? It seems like it's, although it's still under, I think there was a slide that was quite interesting as well, where it shows that, let me see if I can quickly find it. Yeah, here, let me share briefly my screen again, where Metaplanet Holdings Inc. would still be the holder. So because this one is in Florida, Metaplanet Holding Inc., right? And that's the one that holds 95.7%. But I still suspect that Superplanet will be the publicly traded company going forward, again, based on what I see on the slides. But yeah, maybe too early to tell. Maybe Dylan and Simon have some interesting knowledge on their back that they might want to reveal at some point.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting too. There was one of the slides. Can you go to slide, maybe it's 12 there, where they're talking about, these are things we talk about on the show, at length, but it just shows the current BTC-backed preferred stock is $16 billion. That includes STRC, STRF, SATA, and Strategies, others, prefs. So a relatively small market. When you look at, DeFi lending, there's $40 billion of total value locked just in the DeFi ecosystem. So that just shows, there is demand for yield backed by Bitcoin. You've got U.S. money market funds. The fund comparison, we're at basically all-time highs, and money sitting in money markets, earning a token yield tied to treasuries. That's almost $8 trillion in the addressable market. U.S. corporate bonds are over $11 trillion now. The global debt market, of course, is $350 trillion and counting. So it's just it just shows the opportunity that Metaplanet sees, of course, in the deep liquidity that is U.S. markets. I think the big takeaway from that slide for me was just they think the preferred stock value of $16 billion that Strategy, and Strive have started is just scratching the surface of where they can reach with this. So, any other big takeaways or thoughts about what could be next for Metaplanet? Realistically, what do you think? How quickly do you think the company can execute? Because I think we saw Strategy come to market with the preferreds, I think, pretty quickly after the idea was born. Strive obviously is the case of racing to the markets with a pref in just a couple months. After going public, are things trickier here for Metaplanet being a company domiciled in Japan? Obviously, they've got to close this transaction. There may be some more on the legal front where they are a global entity. But realistically, how quickly do you think we could see a pref come to market?
So I think they mentioned Q4 to close out on the deal, right? So earliest when that is closed. So I wouldn't expect anything before the end of Q4, I would say, but difficult to say. I think, yes, Strive has demonstrated that this can be done quickly, right? And probably they're already working on whatever they can in the background in parallel to the acquisition here.
Yep. Yeah, we talked on last week's episode about with some speculation about 21, potentially being backstopped by Tether, where 21 could take a big stake in Tether. This is kind of like there's a lot less speculation involved for scaling a pref. So, if you have Metaplanet, Superplanet is basically the U.S. subsidiary of Metaplanet, it's a lot more easy to paint the picture of, the size of this pref in the U.S. could IPO at a pretty big price, right? Strategy IPO'd Stretch, I think, at $2.5–3 billion in 2025, and that was, they had hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin. Strive's IPO was in the $100 million of range, but is it out of the realm of possibility that this could be, close to $1 billion IPO for a company that has 43,000 Bitcoin on the balance sheet? Let me just do the quick math here. That's basically Metaplanet's got almost $3 billion, at today's Bitcoin prices, of the asset on their balance sheet. So how big do we think this pref could look like if it gets launched, say, first half of 2027?
Well, I think the thing to be on the lookout for is going to be the yield. One of the advantages to being in the Japanese market is that they can get away with providing a lower yield, right? But if now they're going to be launching in the US markets, they're going to have to compete with the SATAs and the STRCs and even just the money market funds. And so some of that advantage might dissipate in order to attract the capital. So it'll be really interesting to see what that starting yield comes in at and what the mechanism is to raise or lower the yield over time if it's a variable rate yield. I would expect that they don't want to go too high in that yield because, right now, one of the advantages to Metaplanet is their hurdle rate their cost of capital hurdle rate compared to other Bitcoin treasury companies, which just leaves more of the accruing to the equity for their shareholders. So it'll be interesting to see if, that's the strategy within the Japanese market, but then they have to play the game on the ground here in the US and be competitive with their yields. So that'll be what I'm looking at. And I have a feeling that yield, more than anything, will determine the success of the initial raise.
Yep, that's true. I wonder what they've learned And again, I'm sure they've got a lot of these plans, and predictions are, looking back can get stale pretty quickly. But what do we think? What do we think they've learned from the dividend cadence? That strategy, um, strategy started with quarterly dividends on their prefs. Stretch moved to monthly and now semi-monthly. Strive went straight to, from monthly to daily dividends. What do you think about dividend cadence? Is there something to learn from what's been tried by strategy and Strive thus far? And if you were heading a company or advising a company, um, what's your takeaway with I guess the allure of monthly or even more frequent dividends?
I
Tim,
think
maybe I'll throw it to you, Tim. Do you have a thought on like how interesting is paying dividends more than monthly for investors? And do you think that moves the needle on how much, Metaplanet can realistically raise?
Yeah, I think it's too soon to tell. I mean, we've obviously seen that going to daily dividends doesn't bring you right back up to $100 par um, in some magical way, but it's the trough of the bear market, so it's too soon to tell. I think whether you go monthly, semi-monthly, or daily is probably less significant than just being thoughtful about the Japanese public company. How does that flow through to a Nasdaq or New York Stock Exchange listed company? If that's the company, Superplanet in this case, and I'm just right game theorying this out. If they launch a pref with Superplanet and it IPOs at 50 or 100 million or 200 million, then that uh, Superplanet Co kind of right, it's incubated in there and not directly outsizingly, which is not a word by the way. It's not having an outsized impact to Metaplanet, the parent company, if you want to think about it that way. Um, to your point, yeah, it's going to have to be a 12 and a half, 13.5% yield in the US. Um, and probably not a bad idea to have it, you know, be the third one or the fourth one or the fifth one. You don't want to be the 10th one. And as far as, yeah, like Q4 2026 for closing this, I wouldn't be shocked if they launched a pref in that same quarter or the quarter after, before the next raging bull market really gets going. So, I mean, looks like really great timing as far as opportunity and the cycle, the bears and the bulls go.
Yeah, it's difficult to point to why exactly SATA is trading better than STRC, but objectively it is, right? And it has been for a few months. So is it the daily dividends or is it the more stable USD reserve that the Strive had over the last year? It's difficult to know why, but it looks like more frequent dividends is more interesting to the market, at least if you compare those two quite similar products, right?
Yeah, certainly to retail. And I think that's really the question is like, are these companies balancing a retail and institutional credit strategy? Saylor addressed this in the Q&A that I mentioned earlier. And he said, him and Fong Li said, yeah, we're looking very closely at SATA's daily dividends, but our institutional investors are very happy with quarterly payouts or even semi-monthly payouts. So if strategy really wants to scale, it's going to be with institutional capital. They've done the AI videos, they've attracted the retail user base here, but for real growth ahead, it's going to be institutional, and institutional doesn't really get excited or impressed by daily dividends. They don't need it to live off of or buy their coffees. This is more of a money management and cash flow type of consideration for them. So even quarterly, which is what STRD and STRK pays. Even quarterly is enough for an institutional investor, and semi-monthly is definitely more than enough for institutional capital. So I imagine Metaplanet is going to want to start with retail, get that trading volume up, get some success and track record, and then also try to, levy that into more of institutional capital. It seems to be the launch pad that these companies are going to have to take in kind of order of operations. But strategy has made it very clear their eyes are on institutional capital, and institutional capital is not concerned.
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, I wonder, and this is kind of out of the realm of what we typically cover. I'll cop to saying I don't know a ton about these, other treasury companies that are stacking like Ethereum or other coins like Solana or whatever. But this is Tom Lee's company, and they issued earlier this summer, right at the beginning of the summer, late spring, a pref as well. And the size of this is the notional value is $350 million, secured by, I guess the market cap of his company is about $10 billion. This one pays a 9.5% interest rate on their preferred equity, and it pays weekly dividends. So I wonder, is this signal at all to the fact that there is some demand out there for more in the U.S. pref market, and that Metaplanet basically has nothing to worry about being the third one to come to market, with a sizable Bitcoin stack behind Strategy and Strive, because just looking at the price action of this Ethereum Treasury pref, which was the first one to launch, as far as I know, it's been relatively similar. It debuted at $87. There was a drawdown to $81, and it's had a steady move toward the $100 par. It hasn't even hit par yet since it IPO'd. As we know, it took a while for Strategies prefs to hit that. So is this, I guess, is this informative at all into what the market could be like for Metaplanet, or should we not read into anything because this is like an Ethereum treasury company?
I mean, at a really high level, I think when job markets are good and incomes are good compared to the cost of living, fixed income is less attractive, and that we're entering a next decade where AI is going to replace a lot of jobs. There's a lot of anxiety about people being able to hold on to their careers, or having to maybe take pay cuts in order to hold on to their careers. There's the need for these dual income households. So I think the demand for fixed income is only up and to the right going forward. And then it really just comes down to what is the quality of that fixed income, and is the investor feel comfortable that the asset or the operating business, whatever it is that is backing and making that dividend obligation sustainable to pay into the future, is that adequate? And so, I obviously think Bitcoin is the best asset to back the fixed income future. And I just think there's a lot of room for more fixed income products. I myself have been looking at them more than ever before, just because of the craziness in global markets and the unpredictability of whether it's Fed rates, World War III, all these conflicts, and just AI job displacement. I mean, fixed income is something that you kind of have to buy while you have the capital. And if you miss that window in time, and you might end up in the very scary straits that we often refer to as retirees who run out of capital late in their later years. So I think fixed income is probably top of mind for many households today.
Yeah, I think you're right. Just one more, I guess, to wrap the bow on the Metaplanet conversation, then we can get more into what Strategy and Strive were up to this week. Are you guys surprised they didn't do like one of those pipe deals? Is that just a lesson learned from a lot of the pipes that closed at the back end of the Treasury summer last year? Why do you think they came in and seeded this transaction with their own Bitcoin? Is it just market dynamics? It's harder to raise money in an attractive way in this bear market. And what do you think about the short term and long term alignment that they're able to foster by bringing in their own Bitcoin to this transaction?
Yeah, those are some really good questions, Tyler. So I'm going to go with speculation here on my end, because obviously I think besides the Metaplanet team, we don't know much as of now. But coming back to your pipe discussion point, yeah, I think the capital markets right now probably are obviously a little bit less open to Bitcoin treasuries. So that's probably one of the points. And we've seen there's been a lot of pushback on these pipes from the summer hypes and all of that. So potentially they wanted to try something new and try something that is more aligned with shareholder value just in general. And it's going to be really interesting to know why they took this company, right? Because obviously it's a very small company, probably it just fitted what they were looking for, like their criteria. And they were able to find probably a management that was also open to the Bitcoin treasury strategy. So there's probably a lot of factors that they had to go through and have a sort of checklist that they went through and say, okay, all of the criteria I met for what we're exactly looking for. And potentially also just having this seed of the Bitcoin that was also added, and that the management of this company also accepted, right? So I think it's just that they found this sort of gem, if you can call it that way, in the middle of the pack, and they decided to go into business with them, with the acquisition through the seeding of this Bitcoin, right? Otherwise, that's just, yeah, as mentioned, it's just speculation on my side, and I would be very, very curious to hear what the management on Metaplanet would say, and also what you guys think about it, actually.
Yeah, I'm curious to see also, how quickly this moves, the prefs in the Japanese market and what that looks like moving forward. Does this allow them? Does this slow them down in their pref in the Japanese market, or are they able to accelerate that? But time will tell. Like I said, maybe we can get Dylan to make a surprise appearance one of these weeks and give us the real breakdown on the inner workings of what they're thinking, the team over there at Metaplanet. Yeah, looking at strategy this week, obviously more of the same, right? So I'll bring up the filing from this week. They instead of selling Bitcoin, they issued some of the MSTR common equity this week, $333 million in net proceeds, and they used that again to buy back STRC. And that's the more of the same. I think that's 4 weeks running now that they've bought back Stretch. We're over $500 million that they've bought back, $132 million this week, and they stacked some more into the U.S. dollar reserve, which now sits at $4.8 billion, which gives them 2.8 years of dividend coverage. I guess noticeably this week, STRC's price was relatively flat. I guess over the last week compared to it really chugging up. That makes sense as it's struggled to come back to par here, and the last 5% I think are going to be the hardest. Why do you think the market hasn't responded as well to the buybacks maybe this past week? Are more buybacks in store until this thing gets back to par? Yeah, what are we thinking about strategy this week, Chase?
I think that last 5% just might come down to us having to see Bitcoin trend back towards previous all-time highs. I mean, that last 5% is probably representing you can think of it as the last 5% of skeptical dividend investors who are like, I don't know if I really trust Bitcoin right now. It could drop to 20K. I heard somebody say it could drop all the way down to 13K. There's a lot of talk of these really ground falling out from beneath us price targets, and who's to say that they're wrong? Bitcoin can definitely go lower from here, and ultimately this is fixed income backed by an asset that is being shaken right now, at least to people who are not as convicted as maybe MSTR shareholders or this group on this call. But that last 5% is, as you said, it's going to be the hardest 5%, and I wouldn't expect us to really reach it until we start to pull ourselves out of the bear market.
We also had the ex-dividend date on Friday, I believe. So that's why also it dropped down a bit earlier in the week on STRC. But we also saw last week already that the news, the the 650 million that they increased their USD reserve last week. On those news, STRC didn't go up, right? So it does seem to be a bit stagnant around 95 now, and might be difficult to move it further. But I think in general, right now, strategy, if they raise fund by issuing the common ATM, I would rather see them buy back STRC than continue to increase the USD reserve, because it seems like it helps STRC more, at least for now, in the short term.
And it has a similar effect in that it makes the USD reserve less meaningful, right? So it's almost like getting your cake and eating it too.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, on the raise this week, so the 330 million, they also used 50 million for the dividend payments for STRC. So we see right now that they increased the USD reserve, and theoretically they have 2.8 years of dividend coverage. But at the same time, every time they have to pay dividends, they don't use the USD reserve. They find other ways to finance it, right? So it's also important to note that this really is a theoretical reserve that they never had to tap, not once during this bear market, right? They always had other ways to finance the dividends.
Yep. Yeah, I do wonder if they continue the aggressive buybacks. Is the market requiring that from them moving forward or not? So it'll be, I think, next week's announcement will be really instructive to see, are we selling more of the MSTR common? Are we selling Bitcoin again to finance some buybacks? We're pretty confident that they're going to keep raising the USD reserve at least to 3 years of dividend runway. So I think next week's announcement will be really interesting. If Tim, I'm curious what you think. If they've got $1 billion authorized for STRC buybacks in total. So if they do deplete that and STRC still isn't back to par and Bitcoin's been still kind of trending sideways and we don't hit the bull market full on, I know you're always bullish, but which I really appreciate the optimism when I chat with you, Tim. So if Bitcoin chops around, they spent $1 billion on buybacks. What's the next step? Do you think they authorize more for buybacks? Do they just kind of let STRC ride once they get to that point where they're comfortable with the size of their USD reserve?
Yeah, the target. Yeah, maybe they'll authorize more. They can always just choose not to do anything, which I think is actually a stronger option than people give it credit for. But I think we would probably all agree the market doesn't usually look kindly on companies that are not doing anything, right? As human beings, we always want to do something. And maybe it's not even the thing we should be doing, but we always want to do something. So, yeah, I mean, I've heard several analysts, including Grain of Salt, say, we really think they're going to just keep stacking cash in the USD reserve until it gets to $6 or $7 billion, so that they have several billion, even with the converts effectively paid off, without paying off the converts, because you don't actually get credit from the market for paying off the converts. You want to effectively pay them off without paying them off, but maybe they will pay them off. I'll stop there.
Yeah, that's to that no net debt narrative that they'll be able to say that you don't have to retire the converts so long as the USD reserve outweighs the total converts outstanding. You can claim you have, no net debt, and maybe that's just as good, especially given the reaction to using the USD reserve to pay the converts last time. I doubt they're going to jump back into that.
There was a nice post from Søren Basher around the USD reserve, and it's quite interesting how the net debt or zero net debt of strategy really converges exactly more or less at the 4-year. So I think that would be a pretty nice narrative from strategy to say, hey, look, we have 4 years coverage and zero net debt. So probably that's one of the things that they're looking at. I don't know. So exactly that one. So you see basically the red line, which is the debt level, and the blue line, which is the 4-year coverage, and they converge together. So having such a narrative in the market could be a strong one. And yeah, we've discussed it quite a few times already with Quentin as well. I don't know if the market cares that much anymore, though, because I think it clearly the reaction was very negative when they drew on the USD reserve so much to pay back the converts. They got really punished, but then they recovered, right? And now again in the last 2 weeks they increased it almost by almost $1 billion again, and the STRC didn't react or positively anymore. So I don't know. It's the story is already that they have multiple years. They have almost 3 years of coverage, and that's a lot, right? So it would have to be a very long bear market to have. And again, they're not using it. We're in a bear market, and they're not using this reserve. So I don't know if increasing it to 4 years, 5 years will make a difference for STRC.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, the common equity would respond really poorly in a situation where they increased it, I think, that much, especially if Bitcoin's bear market continued, another year, and they were sitting at like, $5-6 billion. I think common equity holders would get really impatient in that point. I don't know if you guys caught on the investor Q&A that Saylor did with Natalie Brunel just was that yesterday. He used a comparison, and I hadn't heard him say this before, but he, as himself being a large shareholder of MSTR common stock, he compared, like, these are the investment days, the early investment days of Amazon, like with Amazon Prime or Netflix. The common equity holders realize they have to go through a little bit of pain. And this is a very different tune than the tenor he took last year when, he was saying things like winter's not coming back. And now it's, sometimes we have to go through 1 to 2 years of pain as common equity holders. He doesn't think, your time horizon's more like 7 to 10 years as a common equity holder, and probably doesn't need to be more than 4 years the way Bitcoin cycles have gone. But do you think that was a fair analogy, comparing, Strategy's growth, Strategy having a sort of subscription model with their digital credit, but the more apt comparison, I think, is that, it's just this early investment phase where Strategy is like, we want to own this digital credit model. We think it's going to be huge. We think the total addressable market's going to be $100 billion, $200 billion, whatever it is, $1 trillion, however big this thing can get. And then that the common equity holders will reap the rewards. I think, thinking about Saylor's history as an investor, he's reportedly really, and he's talked about this, he was a really successful investor, throughout the 2000s to 2010s as an early investor, so to speak, in Apple, in Amazon, in Google, where he was just like, oh, these companies are just going to own their market niche, and I want to own as much of that equity as possible. And I think he's trying, again, to transmute that strategy and play it on his Bitcoin accumulation model. Is that a fair comparison, guys?
Well, I mean, he invests in network effects and he understands network effects. And I would argue that Strategy has become a network effect business where they have the biggest Bitcoin hoard, which allows them to issue the most digital credit, which then allows them to acquire an even larger runaway network effect of the Bitcoin hoard, which then allows them to issue even more disproportionate amount of the digital credit backed by Bitcoin against competitors. So I see Strategy's model as a runaway network effect and definitely a sufficient moat in terms of Bitcoin held. I sent a link in the chat, Tyler, that I thought might be interesting. It's a tweet by Chris Milas, another solid Bitcoin treasury analyst following MSTR. I don't know if you can pull that up. I really feel like this hits the point home, so I'll read it out here. So Strategy's USD reserve now covers dividend obligations for 2.7 years. That means MSTR bears have to put up with the company being around for at least another 2.7 years, and it assumes Bitcoin goes to zero during that time. It also assumes that strategy doesn't raise a single additional dollar through STRC. And it also assumes management doesn't continue strengthening the USD reserve. Good luck. I mean, it's just true that like all of these things would have to somehow go wrong, and over that time horizon for strategy's balance sheet to truly be at risk. And it's just really hard when you spell it out this way to hear arguments against it. I mean, I understand if you're Peter Schiff and you think Bitcoin's going to zero and this whole thing is a Ponzi scheme, then sure, strategy is not for you. But it still irks me to see so many people who are bullish on Bitcoin unable to also believe that strategy is going to make it out okay as the largest holder of the asset that they're bullish on.
Yeah, that's Schrödinger's Bitcoin that we talked about a few weeks ago, right? Yeah. Thinking Bitcoin will be successful, but MSTR won't at the same time. It's a difficult narrative to explain.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to believe that sentiment could go lower and these prices can go lower. Like, okay, but for 2 years, for 2.7 years, for 4 more years. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how all of this, like the perspective at the beginning and the middle of the next bull run. Tyler, guys, appreciate you guys having me on. I got to jump to another meeting here.
Yeah, we'll wrap it, Tim. Thanks for joining today, and thanks to the guys. Appreciate you all, of course. Yeah, we'll be back next week covering it all, and anxious to dig into the latest moves from strategy, from Strive. Maybe we'll have some more insight into the Metaplanet deal, but I think interesting times are ahead. It's been fun kind of analyzing what's going on and reading this from the high level view, and I think the teams at these companies overall, the lesson I've taken is they've learned a lot in the past year. They've learned a lot since the inception of these strategies. Certainly the team at Strategy, Michael Saylor and Fong have learned, even longer in the market. We're coming on, it's been 6 years since they initiated this strategy, and it really feels like they've done a lot in the past year. It's kind of crazy the amount of iteration, the new funding methods that have popped up, and I'm anxious to see how this goes in the future. We can't know where Bitcoin's going in the short term. We don't know where it's going to be in a year or 2 years. Long term, obviously, all of us here on the show have great conviction that it's a superior digital store of value, and that the strategy employed by these companies are going to be extremely rewarding and fruitful for the companies and equity shareholders if you think that Bitcoin does that thing. But it's been great to see these guys build during the bear market, and I'm excited to see where this all goes, and the new strategies, the new funding methods, the new levers that the management teams can pull. But for Chase Palmieri, Quentin, Yves, Tim, I'm Tyler. Make sure you come back and see what's going on next week, and thanks for spending an hour with us. Stay orange.